Travelport it provides e-commerce technologies to help buyers and sellers of travel make it easier for you to get from point A to point B. And we have a large, our products are basically based on software. And so we have a large number of teams that are building software products to power the travel sales process. So as we're thinking about what every Agile organization has in common, what I'd like to speak to you about today is 3 common challenges. Now, some of the presenters so far have been, referencing these challenges. The challenge of predictability. Can I deliver what I said I was going to deliver? The challenge of productivity. Do I know, how much effort it takes to deliver a unit of work? And how do I improve that over time? And then finally, the challenge of business value, so that if I build something and I put it into production and I operate it as a business capability, am I able to do that in a way where the benefits that are accrued to customers and the company exceed the investment cost plus the operating and a hurdle rate? So let's talk about the predictability challenge. Now, one of the key things that's critical about predictability is that it starts with individuals. And so, there's a logical order of, confronting these challenges, starting with predictability, right? Everyone who is skilled at software development at some point in their career was not skilled at it. And therefore, each one of us has a predictability story. Now, my predictability story started when I was a sophomore at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And at the time, I was studying sociology, and I had an opportunity to work on a project to study political contributions to Illinois legislative candidates. So I got to find out who the crooks were before they got arrested. And when I began to work on the project, we were collecting data from Illinois Department of Elections tax records, and we were transcribing them into electronic data that then we could analyze to understand, how the politicians got their money when running for Illinois General Assembly. About a month after I got on the project, the graduate student who did all the computer programming left the project to take a job in market research. And I was the only undergraduate on the project. None of the graduate students wanted to touch the computer, so I inherited the programming work. And now at the time I thought, wow, this is great. I may eat when I graduate. And that thus began my predictability story of learning how to write computer software using a commercially available statistics package. And at first I began to modify other people's programs to understand, try to use what was already in place. Then as I began to understand how the software worked, began to write my own programs, and so I learned that over time. Similarly, everyone goes through a process of, I'm unskilled, I have to spend a lot of effort to develop a skill, and then I begin to get consciously competent at it. If I follow these specific steps, I can get the outcomes I want. And then when I become, truly skilled at it, I can learn where to break the rules and when to break them. And Agile has that same progression. That depending on what techniques you're using, teams begin with, following a playbook, as Mike was talking about earlier this morning. And then as you get comfortable with the playbook, you run into situations where the playbook, specifically as set up, doesn't quite work, so you modify it a bit. And then as you learn where the modifications, move you forward and where they don't, you make other modifications. And then you get to the point where it just becomes part of your normal work practice, and you can become truly flexible and adaptable because you have this base of skill that you can then use to interact with a particular environment. Now, that individual predictability then requires ongoing investment in skill development. So, you get a set of skills, but you're in a new situation and you need to develop new skills sometimes, or to learn how to apply the skills that you have in a different way. The challenge is that once you get to be predictable as an individual, then you run into the problem of teams. Because teams are more than just the sum of the individuals. And particularly if you're hiring early career people, they've come through an educational system that is basically makes it hard to work in teams. You have these things called exams. They are large batches. You get, weeks or months of work where you're evaluated, in a 1 hour or 2 hour event. You're told that working in a team is cheating. And then you go into a workplace and that there's a right answer. Because the exams represent, you have one right answer. It's on the exam. Either you get it right or you don't. And so then when you come into the workplace, you kind of have to unlearn all of that. Because in business, there's no one right answer. The probability is that you're not going to get it right the first time. And if you work all by yourself, there's a limit to what you can get done. And so you have to figure out how to work in teams. Now, as a sociologist, I know that that the unit of analysis in a group is the number of relationships. And so what you're managing as a leader when you have teams and then teams of teams is how do you scale the combinatorial expansion in the numbers of relationships. So, if you have 10 people on a team, the number of pairs on that team is 10 times 9 divided by 2, or 45. And then you have the number of triads on the team, which is 10 times 9 times 8 divided by 6, and so on. And so it gets really complicated really quickly. And the agile approaches, the two pizza teams, the team of teams approaches where you have known communication mechanisms across teams, help organizations account for that number of relationships challenge. So the next thing to be predictable is making the work visible. Now, a number of the other speakers have talked about making work visible, but from a practical perspective as a leader, there's all kinds of work going around that you don't know about. And I'm currently leading 2 teams of agile teams. They're on different areas of our business, and in each team of teams is around 100 people, and they're organized into 2 pizza teams, and we have periodic ceremonies for those teams to collaborate. And we've organized our work in 10-week increments that are then broken down into 2-week iterations. And one of my teams that started working that way at the beginning of the summer, we had our first planning event, and the teams had gone to their breakouts. And as I walked around the breakout areas, I noticed that the available capacities of these teams that were being reported on the walls were less than 50% of what I expected. And this is part of, as a leader, of being in the work and knowing enough about how the work is being done to ask the right questions is critical. Because I began to ask, don't you have 10 people on this team? Why is your capacity, what I would expect for a team of 5? Well, we've got a bunch of, work that's not part of this effort that we're managing separately. Oh, that's interesting. Why is that work not in your backlog? Well, it's not really part of this effort. And it's like, oh, that's kind of odd. And so they were trying to account for the, off backlog work with a guess at how much capacity it required. And I walked around and I saw a pattern after 2 or 3 teams. And so, we called all the Scrum Masters together and we told them all work has to go on the backlog. And we made all the work visible. And sure enough, that when the teams began to point out the work and actually compare the work to the capacity, that they had reserved nowhere near enough capacity to handle the off-backlog work, and it caused a replan. And so what that team learned, through that process was that all the work has to be visible. And when they replanned and made commitments around the total amount of work, that they were able to, have a reasonable commit to deliver rate for that 10-week chunk of work. Another, big thing that we're finding is critical to being predictable is having dedicated teams. Now, that seems like a, mother pie and applehood, point, like, yeah, I got to have dedicated teams. But the sociology of it is critical because, even when individuals are predictable by themselves, they're not predictable as a team. And in order to be predictable, a team needs autonomy, mastery, and purpose, as Daniel Pink has researched. And the key thing is they need the ability to know what they're going to say no to, in order for commitment to work. And so where Agile teams run into trouble is when they have a lot of half-dedicated labor. And so as leaders, it's important for us to, when we dedicate teams, we really dedicate them. And that requires a level of managerial courage about what we're going to say no to. And that's hard because everybody wants to say yes. And yet, what we've learned through, decades of lean and, about, 2 decades at this point of Agile is that when you, work that is dedicated gets done, and when you overcommit, stuff doesn't get done. So, now turning towards, us as leaders, we really need to wrestle with the fact that predictability begins with me. That a predictable leader is a more effective leader. And this model is called the Johari window, and it's a way to think about 2-person interactions. There are the things that I know. So if I'm having a conversation with Dennis, there are things that I know about me, and there are things that Dennis knows about me. And if he knows it and I know it, it's considered public. And if Dennis knows it about me, but I don't, that's my blind spot. And if I know it about me, but Dennis doesn't know it, that's what's hidden. And then finally, if neither of us know it, it's just unknown. And as a leader, if you want to be more predictable with your teams, first thing that you've got to do is make it safe for people to give you feedback. And because if people can give you feedback and tell you stuff you don't want to hear, then that'll reduce your blind spot. And so one of the things that you can do, immediately as a leader when you go back to to your workplace this week, is think about where are the areas in your work where you need people in your life who are willing to tell you stuff that you don't want to hear, and how do you make it safe for them to do that? Then the second thing that we do to increase the size of the public area relative to everything else is through disclosure of sharing stories, telling people what you're thinking about. And so when we do these things, we become more predictable with our teams, and so then they can become more predictable. Now, as we've worked with our teams to improve their predictability, this chart illustrates about a year's worth of work for one of our teams of Agile teams that is building a platform for model-driven application programming interfaces, and it's used by travel agencies to be able to embed our features into their websites so that they can sell travel arrangements. And this team has been working together for about a year in this manner, and we're on a fixed schedule of 10-week program increments so that from the time we started doing this at Travelport, this team of teams started the third program increment. And as you can see from the chart, a couple takeaways are, number one is the team's velocity, in terms of the work that it's getting done per unit of time, is increasing. The team is measuring the percentage of business value that is accepted by our product and commercial teams, and they have gotten to the point where they're using stretch objectives to manage the business value that's delivered, and that from a quality perspective, we've actually improved some of the tracking of our, which has increased our visibility to defects that are escaping from development to testing. And so this team is pretty healthy. This team of teams is pretty healthy, and they're excited about what they're delivering, and they feel better about their work because they have the ability to know what they can commit to, and they're delivering on their commitments. So next, let's talk about the productivity challenge. And I'd like to share a quote from John Tukey, who is a famous statistician and the inventor of the fast Fourier transform. Far better an approximate answer to the right question, which is often vague, than a precise answer to the wrong question. And what's important about measuring is you want to pick something. You want to measure something, and don't spend too much time debating about what you're going to measure, because you want to measure things and begin to learn. And why this is important is because one thing that we've learned in 60 years of software development is that the bigger something is, the harder it is to predict. And what that means practically is, if I make a 30% error in a 2-week deliverable, it's 3 days. But a 30% deliverable in a 6-month, or a 30% error in a 6-month deliverable is like 40 days. And that the estimating errors are nonlinear, and what that means is, the bigger the value is, the more it varies. And statistically, this phenomenon is known as heteroscedasticity, that the errors have a relationship to some independent variable. So the way that Agile approaches combat that heteroscedasticity problem is by reducing batch size. And we've had a number of speakers talking about reducing batch size, and they have a number of desirable properties. One is they help reduce the variability problem because you have smaller errors. Second is that they give you feedback faster, and they help you reduce the risk. Now, the challenge that you have to manage with reducing batch size is, from a lean perspective, is what's your transaction cost relative to your holding cost, and so if you're going to do this in software development, this is why you need to automate your delivery process, right? Because if it costs you 100 hours to build, test, and deploy a piece of work, and you can only do that so many times a week based on the cost model for your business capability. And we at Travelport have had a lot of success with reducing batch time, and over the last 18 months, we've reduced our feature lead time by 88%. And this is a cross-functional effort, working with our product teams to really understand what our product requirements are, breaking them down into smaller things so that we can improve the lead time. Another thing that's critical in terms of improving productivity is improving engineering discipline. And this scorecard is taken from Mary and Tom Poppendick's book, Leading Lean Software Development, Results Are Not the Point. And it focuses on what they call 12 agile engineering disciplines. And I've been leading Agile Transformation with teams in various organizations for over 20 years. And in these approaches, there are practices, parts of these approaches, and then there are automated pieces. And so what I've highlighted on this slide is the process pieces, things like coding standards, design and code reviews, improving your configuration and version management. And these are things that you can do regardless of what automation that you have that improve your productivity because they'll help you eliminate errors. And as some of the speakers have talked about improving quality, why do you want to improve quality before you deploy more stuff faster? It's because nobody likes it when you put bad products into production. Right? So improving the quality is a prerequisite to sustainably improving your feature delivery time. So again, and you'll start to hear a pattern is that improving productivity starts with me. And as a leader, I have to recognize that if I can't manage myself, I shouldn't be managing others. And that we model, and so we need to look at how are we leading our teams? What decisions are we making that make it easier or more difficult for them to be productive? And, in large organizations, a lot of that productivity challenge comes through decisions that we make to reallocate labor or to overallocate labor in ways that make it hard for people to be fully dedicated to one and only one thing. So finally, we'll move on to the business value challenge, and what's critical here is that value is benefits minus costs, and whatever leadership role you're playing, that if you want to elevate that discussion to be at the table and make decisions that are more strategic, you have to understand what generates benefits in your business capabilities and what generates cost. And it's not just one-time development, it's total operating cost. And the better you have a handle on those dynamics in your business, the easier it'll be to have conversation with executives that have business problems to solve, and you'll be able to come up with solutions. So, Dennis talked a bit about business capabilities. I've been working in this space for about a decade, and when I first started working on it, people had all kinds of definitions like what's a business capability. And as I began, everything from a function like marketing to it's something that's described by web services description language. And those are like radically different things that were both called business capabilities at the time. And as I thought about it, for me, it kind of broke out as a business capability is a unique combination of people, processes, and physical assets that generates measurable results. And this is how you tie to business value, right? A business capability has a set of business processes. So if you're building a product, a capability view says there's a bunch of internal business processes that are required to support that product. And if you build the product without the supporting business processes, you're not going to generate value. Then a capability has a set of people or roles, and that need to be trained, that need to execute those business processes. And then finally, you have a set of physical assets, and depending on what your business is like, it may be inventory, it may be stores, or it may be software assets. And all of these things can be tracked and measured in terms of how they contribute to costs or how they contribute to benefits. And as you do that, that's where you can find the opportunities to increase the velocity of benefits relative to costs. And agility, if you're in a role that's on the technical side, then if you can calculate the life cycle cost of something, you can then establish the required profit to make money at it. And where agility unlocks value is through its emphasis on working tested software. That if you can put small things into production and actually operate them, you can validate a benefits hypothesis. They help us reduce lead time so that we know that if you have a bunch of inventory and you're it's not actually getting consumed, that's waste, a form of waste. Another area is by establishing economically measurable acceptance criteria, and this is where working with your partners in product, you can figure out how new features or new capabilities are going to generate benefits. And then finally, team-based funding helps because it makes it easier to predict what the cost of something is going to be. And in numerous situations, I have found where this approach makes it easier to get work done. I had a team that was working on software that manages reticketing, and the team was having challenges figuring out how to scope the work and had missed some delivery dates. And we restructured things around end-to-end business value for subsets of customers and specific geographies. And we had a thin slice of customers and geographies. We built it, we tested it, we put it into production, and we could show how the new capability improved our success rate at automated reticketing by 1,400 basis points, and we were able to show how we were able to do it 25% faster relative to the older system. And that, when the teams actually saw the business value that they were putting into production, they got motivated and they chunked through the next sets of deliverables, and they became more effective at regularly delivering business value that we could measure. So, as a leader then, we need to then commit to value engineering and knowing what stuff costs, knowing where the benefits are, and helping our team members see that and prioritize their work accordingly. So in closing, you as leaders in leading Agile Transformation have a huge influence on your organizations. And because each one of you is in a social network, as you change your behavior, everyone around you must adjust to it, which is sort of the beauty of sociology, is that when you're in a network of relationships, when one actor changes their behavior, everyone else has to adapt, within a few connection points of that actor. And so you have way more authority to make things change in your organizations than you might think. And when you unlock that by knowing where value is created, knowing where costs are created, and being able to explain in those business terms to your stakeholders, and you lead your teams in ways that improve predictability, demonstrate productivity, and demonstrate business value, you will change your organizations for the better. Thank you.